intention to serve. And throughout the promotion of this event, he offered me some very good feedback, and I was very appreciative of that. And so when you meet Peter, hopefully we'll get to meet him in Switzerland one day, but the fact that he used to work at Greenpeace, the fact that he is constantly helping people in what he calls campaigning, business campaigning, he will share a little bit more about that, but let's just give Peter some love.
Thank you very much. We're on Facebook Live, by the way. Hello. So I'm going to talk about campaigning. You probably, when you hear the word campaigning, you probably think of politics. But for me, it's much more than politics. If you know where the word comes from, that makes it a little bit easier to understand. The word comes from the Latin word campus, that means the field. And campaigning means to go out into the field. Who said we're going into the field? It's the military. So it had originally, the word campaigning had a military connotation. It meant to go out into the field and to achieve something by the means of intervention. In military they shoot, and by the means of propaganda, what we call today corporate communications. Now, to go back, I have to tell a little bit about my history. I studied physics, and while I was at university I joined Greenpeace as a volunteer first. And the last years I was working as campaigns director at Greenpeace Switzerland, and I was part of the strategic planning board of Greenpeace. And what we did, we called campaigning. And campaigning in that context had nothing to do with elections. It had to do with making history, changing things, changing decisions. So for me, campaigning is an approach to change people's behavior, their attitudes, their minds, what they think. If you want somebody to vote for you, you have to change him. That person either has to go and vote at all, or not to vote for your opponent. If you want to sell a product, you need to change people's behavior. You want to make them buy your product, and not that of your competitor. So there are common things here, and me being a physicist, and always on the search of truth and natural laws, I had the idea about 20 years ago that there must be like a formula that you can apply to various challenges that are all based around changing people's behavior or their thinking. It started already when I was campaigns director at Greenpeace Switzerland, when I was responsible for all the different campaigns with all the different topics, and everybody had his own planning system. I thought there must be a common planning system. There must be a model that helps you to plan, execute, and evaluate campaigns, and also maybe to train campaigners. And that's the idea that led to starting my own business, which is about 20 years ago. I started my company, and I created this model, and I started teaching it. And it happened very soon that people from the corporate world approached me, because I had originally the idea I will train NGOs how to become more successful campaigners. And then I was approached by people from the corporate world. They wanted to learn from a guy who used to work for Greenpeace how they could achieve their goals. Because for them, Greenpeace stood for concrete results. We didn't only produce hot air, as we say in German. We protected the Antarctica. We stopped nuclear power plants from going into operation. We changed the energy politics and many other things. So it was concrete results, and it was also the capability to inspire people to dedicate their time for a common purpose, and maybe even to get arrested, to take risks. And a friend of mine said, campaigning is the art of making your customers want to go to prison for you. So you really want to convince them, you want more than loyal customers, you want them to be supporters. And that's actually one aspect that is very important when you do campaigning. You don't have a target group that is just a receiver of information. Your target group are people that help you, that support you to achieve your goals. Your customers support you to achieve your goals. Or in politics, your supporters support you. So that is one thing that is in common. And my first corporate client was Dow Chemicals, and there was one guy who was at a lecture that I was giving, and he hired me to run a workshop for them to develop an international, actually a global marketing strategy. So we used this system that I had developed, and the system is built around what I believe are the basic strategic campaigning guidelines that you should follow. It's 14 guidelines, and if you follow those guidelines, you have a higher likelihood of being successful. But in order to follow those guidelines, you need a strategy that makes it easier for you to follow those guidelines. And that strategy has to answer certain questions. And in order to develop such a strategy, you need to ask certain questions during the situation analysis. So that's the model that I created, which I call the business campaigning model. It starts with formulating your idea, and then going into the situation analysis. The outcome of this is the foundation of your strategy, and that will help you to follow those guidelines. So, for example, the first guideline is I call polarize, position and profile. It means that in order to position your company, you have to identify opposite values, where you can clearly say, I stand for these values, but not for these values. Or maybe we stand for this value as much as for this one. And that helps you to create a unique profile. And it's a requirement if you want to convince people to support you, to become loyal, maybe even fans, maybe even have a tattoo with your corporate logo. Think about Harley-Davidson or Apple. It requires that you make it very clear what you stand for and what you don't stand for. So that's the foundation of everything. Some people call it corporate identity. But corporate identity is actually a little bit more. So that's the first guideline, and then there are 13 others. And in order to follow them, you need to follow these steps to develop this strategy. And I did this with Dow Chemicals. We had 3 days of a workshop, and the result was I lost them as clients. Why did I lose them? Because the strategy we developed was so successful. They followed it over 7 years. Every year I called them and I asked them, how are you doing? And I hoped to get another consulting job from them, but it wasn't necessary. The strategy was still working. But I got 7 new clients. So every year I got a call from somebody who said, you were recommended by this guy from Dow Chemicals who would like you to run a workshop for us. So that was quite inspiring, although demotivating at the same time. So yeah, lost clients but got new ones. Another application, by the way, that I learned from Chris that I should really tell this, because I never really told it, was that I worked for the World Economic Forum. You may remember there was a lot of protests in the years 2002, 2003, because it was a closed community and nobody really understood what they were doing, and they were trying to tell what they were doing through the means of corporate communications, PR, advertising, but they didn't get through with their message. And then they called me because they thought this guy is different from all the others. He comes from a different background. He might have unconventional ideas, and this is actually something that is also a requirement in campaigning, unconventional ideas. And we came up with the concept of the open forum. It's a platform where the corporate world and the NGO world come together with the public, and this openness helped them to get a better understanding of what the World Economic Forum does. This is what I call an intervention. Campaigning is the product of communications and interventions. It's not only talking, it's also doing something. When a company launches a new product, or changes a product, or launches maybe a sub-firm, or whatever, that's an intervention. When Greenpeace takes direct action, that's an intervention. So these are the different ways that you can understand intervention. And campaigning is always a product of both. It's not only words, it's also action. Words, and a chemical engineer told me I have to put a multiplication sign in between. It's words times action. Communications times intervention, because if one of that is 0, it's all 0. Yeah, that's the physicist talking. There is one aspect that whenever we are confronted with a difficult situation, and most of the time new clients approach us because conventional methods didn't lead them to success and they want unconventional ideas. And that's one part that we try to identify. Where do we have to change something? It can also be that you might run a very successful advertising campaign, but you don't sell products. And some people might think, okay, we have to change the advertising campaign, but actually it's maybe the internal processes that don't let you sell products. Or a couple of years ago, the owner of a small headhunting company with 4 employees approached me, and she wanted us to do an advertising campaign because they were losing business since about 5 months. And we talked to her, and after this hour discussion, I recommended to her a trauma therapy. Because it turned out that 2 weeks before the problems in the company started, she had a car accident with whiplash, trauma, and she was in pain, and I thought, okay, the owner has a big issue, then the company has a big issue, maybe advertising is not the right solution. This is something that you learn in an organization that I worked for with a limited budget and very high goals. And you cannot afford to waste your money on tools or methods that don't work. So you're always on the search, scouting for new technologies, new approaches in order to identify the best one, the most effective ones. And that also means that campaigning is a very innovative approach. I learned in the 80s and the 90s, whenever a new technology comes up, use it, test it, try to find out how it works for you, and be ahead of your competition. Can you believe that in 1989, 5 years before the World Wide Web was published, we coordinated international campaigns through email? 1989, 5 years before that. And that's what we do today also. I was one of the social media pioneers in Switzerland as soon as they came up. And here we have the next aspect, interaction. Always try to get feedback on what you do. Interact with the community. Give them something purposeful to do. And that's what we also heard yesterday. Purpose is very important. You have to identify your purpose. So every campaign starts with the identity of the organization or the identity of the campaign. And the identity is defined in my model as vision, mission, passion. Actually, passion, vision, mission. You have to understand what's your passion. What's the reason for your employees to come into the office, even maybe there's a blizzard outside and they have to walk and fight their way to the office. What still makes them come to the office? What are the real values? The vision. What's the ideal future that your company strives for? And it's not market share. It has to be something that gives to the society. Because otherwise you can't motivate people. And you can't have customers that support you and not just buy from you. But such a vision is always utopian. So the third one is the mission. What's the core task that you define for your company, that your company stands for, and that you try to achieve as good as possible? And that's what I call the corporate identity. And that's at the fundament of every campaign, of every business, of every enterprise that you do, and you have to answer those questions, and then you know the purpose, and then you know how to tell people why it's relevant for them, why it's worth fighting for you, why it makes sense to have a tattoo with your company logo, and you will get loyal customers. And I think the 15 minutes are almost over, so I would like to finish with maybe one last guideline, and that's make it easy. It's the number 14, build golden bridges. So make it as easy as possible for your clients, for your supporters to do what you want them to do, and if they have a purpose, they will do it. So if you're on Facebook, I'm happy if you can give me some feedback, because we heard feedback is very important, or maybe share this. And I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I hope I could give you some things to think about and maybe be more successful.
Mhm.